Right now, we're going to be introducing Macmillan Education. Belinda is going to be talking about assessing mathematics remotely to achieve better marks. Welcome, Belinda. Oh, Belinda, quickly, unmute yourself. There you go.
My whole introduction. So hi, Joel, and thanks very much for the opportunity. And we're very excited to be here as Macmillan, and I'm also very excited to be here. Just as in terms of a brief introduction, I'm Belinda Germeshuizen with Macmillan Education. I am a qualified teacher, and I have been in the education space for over 13 years. And one of my core roles has always been to assess and address teachers' needs, to be able to see how we can respond to what teachers require in order to make learning and teaching lifelong, make learning and teaching effective, and importantly, make learning and teaching stick and a lot of fun. So one of the things that we've obviously had to address as a content supplier is looking at how teachers and schools have responded to the COVID situation. And I want to talk a little bit more about that today in terms of how one can assess maths in a COVID remote learning environment. It's been really tricky for teachers to adapt to that. So I'm just going to share my screen for a second. Hopefully you can all see my screen now. Sorry, just checking, Joel, can you see my screen?
Perfectly. All good.
Perfect. So as I said, I wanted to make sure we spoke about assessing mathematics remotely to achieve better marks. I'm going to start my timer because, as a lot of presenters have said, it's a very short session, so we have to fly through it. And I just wanted to talk about assessment for a second and the challenges of assessing remotely. The need for assessment hasn't changed, though remote learning has presented several challenges. The most obvious are the access to learners. It's the access to content in a digital format. You know, so many requests came through for e-learning and e-books all of a sudden, and teachers had to figure out what to do if a child doesn't have a book with them or access to a workbook, you know, all of these things that teachers faced. Time associated with converting content. A lot of teachers took it bull by the horns and converted content themselves, created PowerPoint slides, created worksheets that they could email to their learners, but it does take a lot of time. And then availability of platforms to host assessments. Then there was the matter of creating a fair and standardized assessment environment. Teachers being concerned that learners are not necessarily in an assessment environment where everyone is maybe quite responding in the same way or taking the test in the same way. How do we know they're not giving themselves extra time? How do we know they don't have their textbook close by? Things that learners get up to. You never know what advantages they might give themselves. And then obviously on top of that, things like, you know, making sure that learners have access to the correct assessment at the correct time. Then we want to receive our learner responses promptly. You don't want excuses where in the olden days the dog ate my homework. Now it's, oh, my Wi-Fi is down, or my email doesn't work, or my brother's using the computer. If you want to mark your assessment, you want to mark your assessment. Then obviously reviewing and marking. These are busy times. Some of the presenters themselves have said we are working harder than we've ever worked before. How do we take the time to still assess effectively, not be completely bombarded with a mountain of marking that we've got, and then delivering the results? How do the learners get their results? Some tests and assessments are informal, but does a learner have to wait several days to receive an informal assessment? It's the kind of questions teachers are facing and possibly frustrating progress. Then assessing results for further learning and teaching. Once the learners have written, what kind of format have you got your assessment results in order to see whether or not the entire class, the entire school has grasped a certain concept? Or, almost more importantly, how do you quickly identify which learners are struggling, have gaps in their knowledge? And how do you address that effectively from a diagnostic and analytical perspective? And that's what my last point is about, your individual learners not being left behind in a very strange environment. So on the next slide, we look at some solutions for that. And as I said, some teachers have taken the time to do this, which is incredible. You email physical papers to learners, which they then fill in and send back. Very big trust system. Parents often have to get involved, and we know how parents feel about the homeschooling situation. It's been exhausting for them as well. Then there's a lot of free software out there, programs that you can utilize in order to create versions of assessments. So multiple choice format, maybe drag and drop format, maybe short answer format. It is available, but then that potentially also poses the question around, what do you do when it comes to actually marking these, and how do you correlate all of these answers into a diagnostic test? And then there's also the solution of subject portals, which are portals specifically designed to help a teacher teach a specific subject. And this is where your LMSs come in. And a lot of teachers are familiar with those. A lot of teachers are not familiar with those. And sometimes even LMSs or portals require additional setup. So they've got the diagnostics and the tools and the quick feedback, but you still have to put in the time in order to actually create assessments. And that's where the next slide comes in terms of the fact that mathematics specifically has got some nuances that teachers have to face. So, for example, you've got to be able to access mathematical images and graphs. Where do you find content that really exactly explains what you need to have explained or assess? Do you have the right metric system? Do you have the right level of questioning? Do you have something that's CAPS compliant? As a maths teacher, and you need to be able to have a whole selection of activities and specifically images, because you're looking at shapes, you're looking at graphs that you need access to. It's not just word programs and it's not just pictures, it's very specialized images. Then maths papers have a less conventional layout. Once again, it's not just something you can type in Word, which a lot of teachers and a lot of subjects can do. You have to be able to scaffold your questioning. You have to be able to put that image with the graph that we just mentioned in the right place. These are challenges that teachers have to face if they have to create their own material. And then, of course, there's learner access to equipment. How do you expect learners to plot a graph on screen? It becomes really complicated. And if they don't have the right tools, does everyone at home, what do they do? Does everyone have graph paper at home, for example? It probably not. And, these are the things that we have to be considerate of. And then once again, getting the results for diagnostic assessment. How do you really deep dive to see where learners have missed out in their knowledge? Where are they excelling in their knowledge? Where do you have to go back and reteach a concept to one learner? Where do you go back and reteach to all of your learners? And maths is tricky. So I want to touch on one specific solution today, and that is essentially a maths platform. So I'm not saying the other solutions are not good solutions. They are working for people, and I understand that. But in terms of the challenges we are facing, in terms of time, in terms of access, in terms of diagnostics, I'd like to just talk a little bit about how an adaptive maths platform can really, really help you. And one I'm very proud to speak about is Bettermarks, which Macmillan represents. Now, Bettermarks has amazing features, and it's got lots of tools to help learners work at the correct level and answer questions in a fun way and get immediate feedback. But today I'm talking about teacher assessment. So I want to just log on to the web page and show everyone that. So let me just switch over to the web page for Bettermarks. So Bettermarks has a lot to offer, as I mentioned, but specifically in terms of assessment, Bettermarks allows you to create a variety of different types of assessments in terms of formal assessment, informal assessment, timed assessments, assessments that allow the learners to access hints and tips, assessments which are timed, assessments which allow things like calculators. And very importantly and very crucially, the assessments are not just multiple choice. These assessments require the learners to use their actual skill set in order to answer a question. You will often be drawing a graph, for example. You will be shading in percentages of different shapes, for example. It's got different answering techniques. You have to input fractions. And all of these are really important because at the end of the day, when you potentially are back in a maths classroom or you're back in an exam environment, then you are not going to be asking your learners multiple choice questions. You are going to be asking your learners to do these things practically. So we are working really hard to make sure that learners practice, although it's on a computer. So very quickly, I just want to explain how you create a worksheet. So Bettermarks has got grades 4 to 10, and all of the different proficiencies are broken down into their respective categories. So for example, if I want to ask a grade 4 learner about data, I select that as my proficiency, and then I choose different question sets which might be useful to this learner. So as you can see here, I can select a question that is more image-based. We've got a question here that involves different graphs and one with maps. So it is also putting maths into context. It's not just one type of question. We're looking at a variety of different questions. So I'm just going to do 2 questions quickly because all I wanted to illustrate with this is how quickly it was for me to set up an assessment. So I've saved it for today, and it goes into my worksheet bank. In my worksheet bank, this is where the magic happens. So once I've taken the time to create worksheets, a worksheet can take a whole lot of different formats. And before I get to that, I just want to say that worksheets can also be shared amongst teachers. So if the HOD develops a worksheet and wants everyone to write the same test, that can be shared with all teachers and all learners, which makes it really easy. Then we can quickly look at how this worksheet operates. And this will just give us a quick overview of what the learners can expect in this worksheet. So this is the questioning style that will be used in this instance. It's the one that we chose earlier, and the learners will literally drag a graph up and down. As I said, you do not just do multiple choice, you physically fill in what you need to do and answer the question. As soon as you push submit, you then get your feedback. Sorry, that's not right. I'm obviously not of a grade 4 level. What's interesting here is that you will note that I've gotten a red line around several of my bars, but not the last bar. So this means that the last bar's answer is correct. So the learner gets a second attempt in order to try and answer the question correctly before they, just get told, sorry, that's not correct. And what's really great about the program is that the learner will get a hint if they want one. This is now where your difference between setting up a formal assessment or an informal assessment will come up. And if you're allowing hints, then the hints will show you how to answer the question in this case, or it might remind you of a mathematical equation. If this is just for practice, so a homework activity, for example, you'll also be able to access the help, which gives you access to the textbook, which explains the concept to you in more detail. So if you want your learners to re-engage with information that you taught that day or you taught that week, they've got access to a textbook which just explains it to them very easily, instead of them first having to email you, for example, and ask questions, or the parent has to WhatsApp you. As a teacher, this is already available for the learners in full detail. Now I'm going to close the exercise here because I just wanted to demonstrate to you what an exercise looks like. But now, more importantly, I want to assign this exercise. And this comes back to the usability for teachers and the choices that we've got for formal assessment and informal assessment. So I can decide if I want to assign this lesson to a specific class. So I can choose which class I want to assign it to. I can choose several classes. And then within that class, I can say whether or not I want it to be for the whole class. So for example, if it is an actual test, you submit it to your entire class. If you only want to submit it to one child who's really struggling, of which my poor alter ego is always struggling, she gets all the assessments, you can do that. But in this case, we're going to say it's a test and submit it to the whole class. Now, what's great about it is you can give it a start date and an end date. So once again, if it's a formal assessment, if you want to know that the learners are really doing the test at a time allocated to them or for a period of time allocated to them, you can set an end date and a start date. You don't have to do that. If it's more informal and you tell them they've got a longer amount of time to do that, you can just leave it open-ended, especially if you're doing practice and revision for exams. Then you might want learners to be able to access the paper for longer than, than just a few hours. And then what you do is you can decide whether or not it is a practice or a test. Now with a practice, there we go. You can, for example, say that you want to allow the calculator, but you want to deactivate tips and help. And a really nice feature is whether or not you want the same value for all students. Now, this is more a risk in a blended learning environment where learners are sitting next to each other and potentially could look off each other's screens. So you want them to be different values so that they can't actually copy each other's answers. But if you've got brothers and sisters and in the same room, or you've got twins or whatever the case may be, it's also something quite useful for distance learning. If you don't want to have just practice, you can set it as a test. And setting it as a test deactivates a lot of the features. So they can still solve problems in any order, but they will not be given any tips or support. So that little help box that came up, the help page with the additional textbook information, that does not come up. And a learner's answers will only be checked once the test is handed in. So that immediate feedback that you got in the practice that we saw, you don't get that feedback. This information first goes to the teacher before the learners get the results, when you as the teacher are ready to give it to them. And you can even give additional parameters. And what's really great is you can even protect it with a start code. So if you are worried that some learners are going to log in early because you forgot to set the time, for example, you can wait to email or WhatsApp your learners the start code, and then only will they be able to start the test. So these are the different options available to teachers in terms of how to set up a test. Now, I would very quickly want to look at an example of the reports which are then drawn up.
Sorry, Belinda, and I just want to say, can you try and wrap it up? You've gone into the Q&A time as well. So if you could just think about how you can sum it up nicely for us, please.
Perfect. I'm quickly going to show an example of a diagnostic report, and then we are done. So just very quickly, a report can be pulled in Excel, and this report, as very quickly at a glance, shows the teacher who is actually doing their work, who is not doing their work, who is excelling and who's not excelling. So this report can be pulled daily, and you can use it to check learners' progress with a test, an informal assessment, whether or not they're doing their homework. And that's all available in one package, which is what we need from assessment. We need one package where you can get everything on one computer, and it's self-marking, which is an extra bonus. That's me then.
Thank you so much. I think it's such a useful tool, and I see Ricky's been answering questions about it during the chat, but I do think that the more we can offer people around these solutions can really help teachers. So thank you very much. So hi, Ahmed, nice to see you. Thanks for being in the chat. So looking at get hold of Macmillan. Their contacts are on the slides, that if you go and look at the program, and you'll be able to engage with them there, and we'll be sending details about it as well if you've registered for the day. So thank you for the comments. They'd be very keen to engage with you.